The logistics bay smelled of stale coffee, hydraulic fluid, and the faint, bitter tang of unspent propellant, a scent Sergeant Morrison hated almost as much as he hated interruptions to his meticulously alphabetized inventory of tactical rubber bands. He leaned back on the counter, his polished combat boots resting precariously close to the worn, slightly damp mop held by Corporal Kowalski. "Look, Kowalski." He dragged out the Polish surname with the contempt reserved for a particularly noxious piece of forgotten ration meat. "We are not handing out Grade A, mission-critical, cryogenic stabilized optical sealant to the cleaning crew, especially not for maintenance. You're mopping up spilled diesel, not adjusting the bore sight of an HK system." Kowalski, a figure defined by perpetually faded utility pants and an intense, unwavering focus on the industrial bucket at her feet, didn't look up. Her silence only fueled Morrison's casual tyranny. "And what is that, Kowalski? A little scratch?" Morrison gestured with the pen toward a tiny, almost imperceptible scar just above her left elbow, partially covered by the cuff of her heavy-duty fatigue shirt. "A souvenir from falling off your bucket, perhaps? Or did you tangle with a particularly aggressive floor buffer?" He smirked, looking around at the two bored supply clerks who immediately forced strained chuckles. "I hear tell the cleaning crew gets pretty intense about their turf wars. Maybe that's a rank insignia in the clandestine world of janitorial services. General of the Squeegee Corps?" Kowalski finally lifted her gaze. Her eyes, usually obscured by the shadow of her cap, were a startlingly pale blue, flat and devoid of humor. "Sergeant," she said, her voice low, carrying the crisp, precise consonants of someone who had learned English under extreme duress. "The sealant is for the vapor lock in the boiler room chiller. I filed the requisition correctly. Number 307 Alpha 9, approved by facility management." "Approved by facility management, maybe, but denied by the gatekeeper of the good stuff," Morrison countered, tapping a pristine clipboard. "Look, Corporal, you clock in, you mop, you clock out. You are a cleaner. You are not a warfighter. You haven't earned the right to touch Tier 1 material. You especially haven't earned the right to wear that look, that smug, silent look like you've actually seen something worth seeing, like you've ever handled anything heavier than that industrial mophead." He laughed again, louder this time. "In fact, Kowalski, I read your file. Polish army attached, cleaning detail, apparently some wild story about a deployment years ago where your squad cried, 'We are dead,' in an ambush until you allegedly unveiled your minigun and leveled the forest. And what in the blue hell is that? Is that some kind of morbid janitorial fantasy? Did you use a high-pressure hose to clear a jam?" Morrison's cruelty wasn't malicious. It was casual, the bureaucratic indifference of someone who viewed everyone below his clearance level as fundamentally inferior, especially the ones whose purpose was cleaning up his spills. But for Kowalski, that specific phrase, leveling the forest, pulled a wire taut in her mind, snapping her straight back 5 years and 7,000 miles. That story, the one Morrison mocked, was not a fantasy. It was the precise, terrifying, statistically improbable event that branded her soul and permanently etched the faint, hidden mark Morrison had just insulted, the scar that traced the precise outline of the Krzyż Walecznych, the cross of valor. She remembered the humidity first, clinging, heavy equatorial heat that coated the inside of the lungs with wet metal. They were deep into a green hell, a non-permissive environment where every patch of shadow felt like a sniper's nest. Kowalski wasn't a cleaner then. She was a combat engineer attached to a high-risk multinational quick reaction force, QRF. Specifically, she was a crew-served weapons specialist and an expert in field expedient demolition, a skill set honed through brutal training with Polish Grom detachments. Her squad, designated Mongoose 27, was running extraction on a deeply compromised intelligence asset. The convoy was light, 2 up-armored vehicles and a single unarmored utility truck carrying heavy logistical support and Kowalski's specialized payload. They hit the kill zone at 14 hours. The ambush was textbook, brutal, and swift. It wasn't a scattering of disorganized insurgents. It was a well-coordinated enemy element, utilizing interlocking fields of fire and pre-sighted heavy machine guns. The first sound was the unmistakable deep thwump of an RPG hitting the lead vehicle's engine block, instantly sidelining it and transforming the column into a sitting target. Then, the air dissolved into noise. 7.6 Go 2 Tax 54 mm rounds cracked the air like whips, focusing on the soft-skinned utility vehicle where Kowalski was positioned. "Contact! Hard left, RPG, RPG! We are taking suppressive fire from the tree line," yelled the squad leader, Sergeant Pietrzyk, his voice ragged over the radio net. Kowalski dropped flat onto the steel bed of the truck, the metallic ring vibrating through her bones. She could hear the distinctive chunk, chunk, chunk of PKMs engaging, the rounds chewing through the thin sheet metal of the truck bed inches above her head. The enemy had fire superiority, and they knew it. Pietrzyk screamed the words that would later define the moment, the words Morrison was now twisting into a joke. "We are dead. Mongoose 27 is pinned. We are dead." Kowalski's training took over. Fear became a cold, efficient resource, channeled into kinetic action. Her role wasn't to return fire with a standard issue rifle. It was to manage the payload, the absolute devastating heavy hitter they brought for scenarios where sheer volume of fire was the only solvent for the situation. Under the continuous hail of incoming rounds, Kowalski crawled toward the specially fabricated mount, bolted directly into the chassis. Secured there, encased in a hardened steel shell, was their solution: the M134D Gatling gun, the Minigun. The M134D is an object of terrifying complexity and simple lethality. Chambered in 7.62 Sec 51 NATO, it uses an electrically driven rotary barrel assembly capable of a theoretical rate of fire up to 6,000 rounds per minute, though usually governed to a slightly more controllable 3,000–4,000 RPM for sustained operation. The challenge wasn't pulling the trigger, it was the deployment. It required a separate power supply, a complex, meticulously maintained ammunition feed system, and a stable mount capable of absorbing the immense recoil impulse generated by thousands of rounds, leaving the barrel cluster every minute. She reached the weapon. The metallic casing was hot even before firing, radiating the trapped heat of the day. Her fingers, steady and precise, worked the safety and engaged the primary power coupling. The process demanded flawless execution, checking the flexible feed chute for kinks, ensuring the 4,000-round ammunition box was seated correctly, and most critically, aligning the backup thermal sighting system. Pietrzyk was now calling a frantic mayday over the secure channel, giving their coordinates and predicting terminal failure within minutes. Kowalski shouted back, her voice startlingly calm amid the chaos. "Pietrzyk, stand by. Fire solution imminent. Give me direction. Tree line, southeast quadrant. They're concentrating fire from a hardened position near the dry creek bed," she sighted in. The world shrank to the holographic reticle and the dark mass of vegetation concealing the enemy firing positions. The M134D uses a sophisticated mechanism to bring its 6 barrels up to speed instantly. There is no ramp-up hesitation, just immediate brutal acceleration. Kowalski pressed the firing solenoid. The sound was not a burst or a sustained line of fire. It was the sound of a tearing force, a continuous deafening roar that swallowed every other noise in the valley. It was the sound of raw, kinetic energy unleashed with surgical intensity. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. At 3,000 rounds per minute, Kowalski was laying down 50 rounds per second. The concentrated fire corridor she chose was no wider than 3 meters. The 7.62 meters rounds, traveling at approximately 2,800 feet per second, didn't just suppress the enemy, they utterly dismantled the environment they occupied. She walked the fire line, sweeping the forest floor. The term leveling the forest was not hyperbole. Where the rounds impacted, trees splintered into dust, Thick branches were shorn off mid-trunk, and dense foliage was instantly vaporized. The sheer volume of incoming metal created a wall that no flesh and blood could withstand, nor any light cover conceal. The heat signature generated by the rounds impacting the ground was so intense, it briefly flashed on the thermal optics. Kowalski fired for 45 seconds. 45 seconds of controlled, sustained devastation, consuming 2,250 rounds. When she released the solenoid, the silence that followed was profound, ringing with the ghost of the roar. The only sound left was the frantic, panicked shouting of the surviving enemy elements breaking contact, scattering away from the apocalyptic devastation zone she had just created. The dry creek bed was no longer dry. It was marked by a wide, churned scar of earth and shredded material. The hardened firing position was now simply a crater. She had achieved not merely fire superiority, but total existential annihilation of the immediate threat. Pietrik's voice returned over the radio, shaky and awestruck. "Mongoose 27, we are clear. Did anyone else see that? Kowalski, what in God's name did you just do?" Kowalski, sweating profusely, the smell of burnt cordite acrid in her nostrils, began the methodical process of barrel cooling and reloading the feed system. "I provided 45 seconds of localized area denial, Sergeant. We need to secure the package and move." That mission, the one where she operated a heavy weapon system with the focused intensity of a surgeon and the destructive power of tactical air support, was eventually studied extensively by Allied forces for its technical precision under extreme pressure. It wasn't just bravery, it was technical mastery. 2 months later, back in Krakow, she was formally presented with the Krzyż Walecznych, the Cross of Valor, by the Polish president, a distinction shared by heroes of the Warsaw Uprising and the fiercest detachments of the post-war era. The decoration itself was pinned onto her breast, but the small, faded scar that Morrison mocked was the result of a fragment of shrapnel from that day, grazed and encapsulated, perfectly outlining the dimensions of the medal on her skin, a permanent, physical reminder she carried daily beneath her civilian clothes, or in this case, her standard, featureless fatigue shirt. She had requested a lateral transfer to low-visibility logistics support after the intensity of combat began to erode her psychological edge. She needed the routine, the simplicity of things that were definitively clean or definitively dirty, and so Corporal Kowalski, the woman who had single-handedly broken a concentrated ambush with a high-speed machine gun, became a cleaner in a joint NATO facility, seeking refuge in the anonymity of the mop and bucket. But Morrison didn't know any of this. He saw the mop, the drab uniform, the quiet demeanor, and he saw nothing but low rank and incompetence. Back in the present, the logistics bay was suddenly too small, too loud. "Look at her," Morrison sneered, turning back to his clerks. "The silent type. Thinks she's earned something just because she put on a uniform. You want the sealant, Kowalski? Tell me the truth. Where did you get that scratch? Did you get jumped by a rival cleaning service?" Kowalski slowly placed the mop handle against the counter. Her movements were deliberate, unnervingly slow. "Sergeant," she said, her voice now steel-plated, "the scratch is a memento. It is not an insignia, and it is certainly not a point of humor." Morrison leaned in, enjoying the power imbalance. "Oh, it's a memento. Of what, the great tile Polish of 2019? Spill it, Kowalski, or the requisition stays red-flagged. I'm waiting for the big bad war story that justifies your existence in my supply bay." Just as Morrison's arrogance reached its zenith, a sudden profound shift occurred in the atmosphere. The heavy steel door at the far end of the logistics bay slid open with a controlled hiss of pneumatics. Standing silhouetted against the bright hallway light was a figure who instantly commanded the attention of every professional soldier in the room. Major Axel Viking Olsen. Olsen was a liaison officer nominally attached to G7 training, but universally known within the NATO compound as something else, the Ghost. a Danish Special Operations Forces (SOF) veteran who had cross-trained with both U.S. Navy SEAL Team 6 and Polish GROM for over a decade. His uniform was immaculate, tailored for efficiency, his eyes perpetually assessing, and the gravity of his presence was immediate. He carried a custom-built Heckler & Koch HK416A7, meticulously maintained and personalized with a deep bronze finish. It was more than a rifle. It was an extension of his will, recognized by every infantryman present as the gold standard of kinetic projection, a weapon only entrusted to operators of the highest caliber. Olsen didn't acknowledge Morrison or the clerks. His eyes fixed immediately on Kowalski. He had been walking past the open door and had caught the tail end of Morrison's dismissive rhetoric, specifically the reference to the minigun fantasy. Olsen had worked with the Polish QRF file. He knew exactly who Corporal Kowalski was. Olsen walked slowly into the bay. Every boot step was heavy, measured, and final. Morrison, sensing authority far above his pay grade, quickly snapped to attention, dropping the clipboard and adopting a rigid salute. "Major Olsen, sir. Everything satisfactory in logistics today, sir. Just handling a minor discrepancy with the cleaning detail." Morrison tried to inject confidence into his voice, but it came out thin and reedy. Olsen ignored the salute. He stopped directly in front of Kowalski, who had subtly straightened but remained at ease, her posture betraying a discipline Morrison had never possessed. Olsen spoke, his voice a deep baritone, quiet enough that the clerks had to strain to hear. "Corporal Kowalski, show me your arm." Kowalski hesitated for only a fraction of a second. The request was unorthodox, but the voice carried weight. She slowly pulled back the cuff of her fatigue shirt, exposing the skin just above the elbow. The scar was faint, a pale, almost silvery line, a slight topological anomaly on the smooth surface of her skin. It was easy to miss, unless you knew precisely what you were looking for. Olsen leaned in, his gaze intense, examining the outline of the scar. He recognized it instantly. The distinct shape, the precise geometry. It was the negative space of a high military decoration. Morrison, utterly bewildered, began to stammer. "Sir, with all due respect, I don't know what—" Olsen cut him off without looking at him, a simple, surgical sound of dismissal. "Silence, Sergeant. You are not authorized to speak until you are spoken to." The air thickened to the consistency of concrete. Morrison swallowed hard, his face flushing crimson. Olsen turned his attention back to Kowalski. He did not ask her to confirm the decoration. He recited the citation from memory, his deep voice filling the silent bay, transforming the sterile environment into a ghostly echo of the battlefield. Corporal Ania Kowalski, formerly attached 56th Tactical Logistics and QRF Support, Polish Armed Forces. He paused, then delivered the decree, word for painful, honorable word. For actions rendered on 14th of August 5 years prior in the vicinity of Coordinate Delta 7 during a mission to extract high-value personnel under concentrated fire. Corporal Kowalski, exhibiting exceptional technical mastery and profound courage under hostile engagement, independently deployed a crew-served M134D minigun system and utilized precise, sustained kinetic fire to neutralize a coordinated ambush element, employing 2 PKM heavy machine guns and multiple infantry rifles, thereby eliminating the immediate threat and restoring fire superiority to Mongoose 2-7. Her actions single-handedly saved the lives of 6 Allied operators and secured the successful extraction of the asset. The precision of her engagement was noted by all subsequent reviews as being statistically impossible for an operator under such extreme duress. Olsen met her gaze, a fierce professional respect shining in his eyes. "You earned the Krzyż Walecznik, the Polish Cross of Valor. The physical shape of the medal is permanently marked on your body, a testament to blood spilled in service. You did not just level a forest, Corporal. You created a temporary surgical vacuum of existence so your brothers could walk out alive." He turned slowly to Morrison, whose face was now the color of bleached paper. The clerks were staring at the floor, suddenly understanding the profound, irreversible nature of the insult they had witnessed. "Sergeant Morrison," Olson's voice was lethal, low and controlled. "You dismissed a combat award, a symbol of courage and technical excellence, as a scratch. You denied essential material to an operator who has proven her right to access any material on this base by shedding blood for the Alliance. And you mocked a tactical engagement that is now standard required reading for every new Grom field recruit on suppressive fire doctrine." Olson unslung the HK-416A7 from his chest. This action was performed with the gravity of a sacred ritual. The rifle, pristine and deadly, was the pinnacle of modern infantry design, a $5,000 tool of professional application customized specifically for Olson's deadly purpose. He held the rifle out horizontally, muzzle facing the ground toward Kowalski. "Corporal Kowalski," Olson stated, his eyes demanding full attention. "I understand your current posting, but your blood demands respect. You earned the right to touch, examine, or utilize any piece of equipment in this facility, up to and including the tools of my trade." He offered the HK-416 to the former combat engineer. "This is my primary kinetic projection system. It is sighted, clean, and has never been disrespected. I ask you, as an equal in blood and capability, to hold it, not because I need you to clean it, but because I need you to remind these bureaucrats what real authority looks like." Kowalski's eyes went immediately to the rifle. The weight, the balance, the specific feel of the cold metal. It was the language she spoke fluently. She didn't hesitate. She accepted the weapon. Her hands, the hands that currently manipulated industrial detergent and floor scrubbers, wrapped around the rifle's specialized pistol grip with immediate, familiar comfort. Her index finger instinctively lay straight and high on the receiver, demonstrating flawless weapon safety and training. She held the HK-416A7 with its 14.5-inch cold hammer-forged barrel, its optimized short-stroke gas piston system, and its custom Trigicon Visiogi optic, as if it were simply a natural extension of her arm. The entire logistics bay fell into a silence deeper than the one after the minigun stopped firing. The weight of the moment was crushing. The HK-416, the symbol of elite warfighting, rested in the hands of the janitor. Morrison looked at the scene, the cleaning corporal holding the rifle of a Tier 1 operator, her pale eyes fixed on the weapon with quiet expertise. The mop stood forgotten against the counter, suddenly irrelevant. Olson turned to the two logistics clerks, who were now practically attempting to fuse with the shelving unit. He snapped a command. "Front and center, salute your superior officer." The clerks, terrified by the sudden shift in reality, scrambled forward and delivered two of the sharpest, most disciplined salutes they had ever performed. Their eyes locked rigidly on Kowalski. Olson returned the salute, a slow, deep nod of absolute deference. "Corporal," Olson said to Kowalski, "I have a field exercise starting in 30 minutes. You are now officially detailed to my technical support staff for the duration of the day. And you are authorized to requisition the finest optical sealant we have for your boiler room, or anything else you require. Sergeant Morrison will personally escort you and carry your materials." Morrison, his career effectively dissolving into the floor grime Kowalski usually cleaned, could only manage a choked, pathetic nod. "Yes, Major. Immediately, Major." Kowalski gently lifted the HK-416, brought the stock almost to her shoulder in a brief, almost involuntary motion, and then carefully handed the rifle back to Olson. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of thanks. "Permission to resume my assignment, Major," she requested. Olson smiled, a rare, thin expression that was more acknowledgement than warmth. "Granted, Corporal. The logistics clerk will follow you." Kowalski turned, picked up her mop handle, and looked directly at the defeated Sergeant Morrison. "Sergeant," she instructed, her voice flat and professional, "the boiler room is this way. I will need the sealant, 2 gallons of industrial solvent, and 3 feet of Type 2 high-tensile copper wire. Move out." Morrison, the self-appointed gatekeeper of the good stuff, scrambled ahead of the woman whose existence he had just tried to erase, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat, rushing to carry the mundane supplies for the warrior he had mistaken for a mere servant. The lesson was delivered not with violence, but with the cold, undeniable truth of the citation and the sacred transfer of the weapon. Rank means nothing. Capability means everything. If you believe respect is earned by blood and not by rank, type respect in the comments.